So it's safe to say then that an LNG ban on exporting American, cleaner, by the way, and more plentiful gas is indirectly fueling Putin's war machine. Does anyone disagree with that?
What does the Chinese Communist Party fear the most? A few more stealth bombers in the Western Pacific, or an uprising inside China?
This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, don't need a high school diploma. It's not anything high tech about this. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000.
I want to get your take on the threat of communist China. And you were among the first to really raise this issue. Is this administration doing enough about it?
Well, Maria, they're taking some steps. They just added another 37 companies onto what they call the Commerce Department's entity list, and including a major cloud computer, including a firm called BGI, one of the largest genetics companies in the world. And they've had some restrictions on the Chinese semiconductor industry. However, their China policy is constantly at conflict with itself, because you have those that see the national security and economic threat that it is, but then you have so many others, with John Kerry leading the charge, saying, no, we need it. We need a conciliatory approach. We can't be too firm because we need China's cooperation on climate change. And as long as the Biden administration is talking out of both sides of its mouth, the Chinese Communist Party will take advantage of that discord to advance their aims, which are absolutely to replace the United States as a global leader. And I am very pleased to see some Democrats finally getting on board with that reality.
Congressman, thank you for joining us. This threat about shooting down U.S. jets, Pelosi's plane, what do you make of that?
First of all, Trace, the response from the White House apparently is this is unnecessary rhetoric. This isn't unnecessary rhetoric. This is an unacceptable threat. Speaker Pelosi, regardless of what you think of her politics, is number 3 in line for the presidency of the United States. And once again, we see the Biden White House failing to be clear on what the United States finds acceptable and unacceptable. And in this case, needs to make it clear that should any harm come to Speaker Pelosi and her trip to Taiwan, it's tantamount to a declaration of war. That's the kind of clarity we need from the commander-in-chief right now, and we're just not getting it.
And it would embarrass President Xi, but that's not really the point here.
This is as much about internal politics with the Chinese Communist Party as they head into their every 5-year party Congress. And Xi is looking for an unprecedented third term, and he's looking to be elevated to the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, which would be a bit of a historic promotion. So yes, being embarrassed in Taiwan by the speaker going is the last thing he wants. But this is also part and parcel for their bullying tactics. If they turn up the heat enough, then everyone else will stay away. It's just not worth it. But the message it sends to our allies, to the Japanese, South Koreans, Australians, if they don't go, if she refuses to even visit, then what does that say for our ability and willingness to defend the democracy that is Taiwan?
You talk about these bullying tactics, Congressman, and I'm wondering what you thought about the 2-hour, 17-minute phone call that she had with President Biden, where he said that the U.S. must not play with fire on Taiwan, and those who play with fire will perish by it. I mean, that seems to be, at the very least, a bullying tactic.
Oh, absolutely. And that's par for the course for the Chinese communists. But what I wanted to see from Biden was a clearer statement, a policy shift. He slipped in this regard when he was in Japan, where he said, absolutely, we'll defend Taiwan. Then his staff walked it back. We need to move away from the one China policy, move away from strategic ambiguity of what we'll do, make it clear what we're going to do as a deterrent measure because of these types of moves from Chairman Xi.
And switching to Russia. Russia is still selling an incredible amount of oil through India, through brokers in China. I think it's safe to say that Russia benefits when the price of oil is high. Correct? Does anyone disagree? This is how primarily Russia is fueling its war machine in Ukraine and its ambitions elsewhere. Do we agree?
That's true.
So it is, I think you'd also agree, less oil and gas on the international market drives the price high, and therefore both Putin and Tehran, for that matter, have their war coffers full. Does anyone disagree with that? So it's safe to say then that an LNG ban on exporting American, cleaner, by the way, and more plentiful gas is indirectly fueling Putin's war machine. Does anyone disagree with that? I'll take that as a no. And in fact, I'll just share with the witnesses. I just sat down with the Speaker of the Parliament from Lithuania, right on the front lines of Russian aggression. She said we buy 85% of our gas from those terminals in Texas and Louisiana. And at some point soon, they're going to have to go back to buying Russian gas. So we are literally, our domestic energy policy is creating dependencies and fueling Russia's war machine that then we're being asked to spend against by also continuing to support Ukraine. And we absolutely should stop Putin. But we have to examine our own policies and what that's doing for both Tehran and for Moscow. Yet in the assessment, there's nothing on energy policy.
Yesterday was October 7th, and you see protesters and ralliers waving Hezbollah flags and using language that's supportive of Hamas. Here you are. This is a 9/11 generation. I mean, and now we have Americans in front of the White House supporting terrorism, effectively the same sort of language and ideology that you and your service and America sought to fight and defeat after 9/11.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. It's heartbreaking, and it really is an insult. It's salt in the wound after the disgraceful withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's just hard to swallow, and the veterans community of my generation is really hurting. Nothing on the level of what happened to the Vietnam generation, but it is painful to see nonetheless. And I think, unfortunately, the ideology of terrorism, the war of ideas that's going on, Islamic extremism, is still very present. And we have to take a whole of government approach to undermine the credibility of it. And that's why I tell a story of working with an elder here that kept going on and on about his secret weapon. The short version is it wasn't a surface-to-air missile or some kind of special mine. It was his daughters. And he was smuggling his daughters to India to get educated as a doctor and lawyer. And even though this elder himself was illiterate, he said, this is how we're going to defeat the extremists. We have to defeat their ideology. And he was actually quoting, the thing that the extremists fear the most is a girl with a book, right? And so we have to take that kind of approach. Otherwise, we are going to get hit again. We will suffer another 9/11. And I fear the infiltration that we're seeing right now, funded by the Iranians. We can do the same right back to them.
Absolutely.
We should be pushing Starlink last night I tell the story of, I asked the head of the Air Force Bomber Command, what does the Chinese Communist Party fear the most? A few more stealth bombers in the Western Pacific, or an uprising inside China?
Right.
And I'm not for anybody to overreact, calling for regime change in Beijing. However, there are minorities like the Uyghurs that is a modern day genocide that is being brutally oppressed. And that should be the front of our engagement with the Chinese Communist Party and supporting them for people that are crying out for freedom. Reagan knew that and did that all over the world. And he often did it with Green Berets and that by, with, and through mentality.
Well, this summer in Congress, you voted for an amendment to defund NATO. Do you want to actually see President-elect Trump take steps that would roll back the United States' participation in the alliance, or even leave the alliance altogether?
No, what I want to see are portions of NATO truly step up and do their fair share of defense spending. I'm not talking about countries like Poland or the Baltics or the United Kingdom that have met their minimums and exceeded it that they committed to over a decade ago. I'm talking about the big economies, Germany, Italy, Spain, France. Look, with World War, the largest war since World War II, literally on their doorstep, if they're not going to step up now, then when will they? Number one. And number two, we shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back when a few of them finally meet the minimum. We should be at 100% minimum and then celebrating those that are far exceeding that. And with the interest on our debt alone exceeding our entire defense budget, with the threats that we're facing, especially from the Chinese Communist Party, we have to take that very seriously. And we can be friends and allies and have tough conversations about very real burden sharing.
Congressman, just to be very clear, put a fine point on this. You believe the United States will stay in NATO if Trump is once Trump re-enters the White House. You don't think that's negotiable? You don't think NATO membership is negotiable?
Well, look, I think President Trump very much appreciates the role of NATO, how successful it was in the Cold War, but is very frustrated that with a war going on in their doorstep, there are still over half the countries that haven't met their minimum. And he's going to push them hard, as he should, to get to those minimums and then exceed and share this defense burden. And if you look at, for example, like Japan is doubling their defense budget, is taking very real steps to deal with the threat that the Chinese Communist Party faces, not only to the Pacific, but to the world. So those are steps that he has said he will take, and I think promises, made, promises kept.
Can you see the chart here? Yeah, thank you. I think it's very important for the American people to see visually the trend lines of what's going on with our Navy and what's going on with the Chinese Navy. And these are according to DOD and Congressional Research Service numbers. Yesterday, the intelligence community briefed the Senate, the much talked about timeline, and we basically have 5 years, 2027, until the Chinese Communist Party believes they have overmatch in the Western Pacific. Do you disagree with that assessment?
I do not.
Okay. So
I agree with the assessment.
Thank you, Admiral. So I think this is important. This here shows the size of the Chinese Navy. And this is the various shipbuilding plans we've received over the since 2015. In blue here is the size of the U.S. Navy. And I think it's important for the American people to understand that 2027 figure is right there. That's a 105 ship delta. Now, I get it. We can have the capability, capacity debate, but I'm not buying that we can make up for a 105 ship delta, that they can concentrate all in one ocean with short supply lines. And the problem is with your divestment strategy, we're at our lowest point at 2027 when they're at the highest point. And even when we come out of it, we still have these massive deltas. Gentlemen, I think we are being set up, and these budgets are setting us up to lose in a war with China. And that is a disservice to the sailors that are going to be out there on old, broken down ships and outnumbered in 5 years. So with this fight up, what we're buying right now is what we have to go to war.
That's right.
That's right.
And you're not going to change that significantly between now and 2027. And so our emphasis is to deliver for the nation the most lethal, the most ready, the most capable Navy that we can based on the resources that we have.
But I don't think your plan gets us there, Admiral. I mean, just candidly.
What we do
because we're going backwards, and so first of all, those estimates, 2031, 2028, those are best case scenarios. And this blue line's a best case scenario. This is on your option 3 of the shipbuilding plan. But we've seen from the Ford-class carrier, the Joint Strike Fighter, to LCS, that those estimates are often grossly off.
We're deploying the Ford-class this year. So
it's been around for 20 years. The office came in 1997, so the estimates are off, which means, look, at the end of the day, I think we have allowed this committee and the building to fall into a false choice of readiness versus modernization. I think the real choice is how much money should you be asking for to be ready to win. I don't want I don't want to pace. I want to overmatch. I want to win in the next 5 years. So if you were given more money, Admiral, would you accelerate the ready reserve fleet modernization? Would you accelerate the frigates? Would you accelerate much of what you're trying to do? And would you keep more cruisers? Not all of them, but would you keep more if this committee gave you more? And that's not all your necessarily issue. I mean, you've had a lot of predecessors, but we are where we are now. And I think we need a drastic increase to be able to cover the gaps within the next 5 years. What investments do we need to make in the industrial base rather than letting that limit you and the budget limit you? What investments can we make in the industrial base to close that gap?
We're making over $2 billion right now in the
it's not enough.
And I think the Pentagon has become so focused on, I know it's a balance, I know there's a pendulum swing, but on making these kind of handmade, bespoke, high-tech Ferraris, when sometimes you need a fleet of pickup trucks. And you certainly need, whether they're Ferraris or pickup trucks, that can operate in the desert and can operate out in the corrosive environment in the Pacific. So let's talk about some of your pickup trucks. The Air Force owns and operates DOD's largest fleet of commercial derivative aircraft. They use commercial parts. This, Mr. Secretary, is a bag of bushings. This bag of bushings, stamped out by machinists, don't need a high school diploma. It's not anything high-tech about this. All of this bag is compliant with the FAA specifications. How much do you think the Air Force pays for this bag of bushings?
I don't know, Congressman.
$90,000. This is a $90,000 bag of bushings that you need for any jet turbine engine just to operate. So the exorbitant cost due to DOD only buying commercial parts from the OEMs, which is essentially sole source, is literally driving us out of business. I mean, the interest on our debt alone is now exceeding, for the first time in American history, the entire defense budget. We can't afford it anymore. So with FAA compliant parts, you cut the cost in half or even more. So my question is, why can't, these are commercial birds out there. By the way, it has all kinds of implications for contested logistics when you can access commercial parts in the middle of a war, potentially in the Pacific. Why can't we use FAA compliant? I mean, it's this safety standard leader in the world. Why can't we do that?
I don't know a reason why we couldn't. I'm familiar with some of the issues you're trying to raise here from my previous position.
Yeah, I know you are. That's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, Defense Logistics Agency used to report to me. That's where we do a lot of our parts acquisition. And we had an issue when I was there with people gouging us, basically, charging us too much for parts. And we ended up, I think, in court over it.
What can we, just in the interest of time, Secretary, come back to us? How can this committee help you fix that? We literally can't afford the modernization, the recruiting, the basing, everything we need if we're paying $90,000 for a bag of bushings.